And that is the reason that AI is getting all this attention now.
Yep.
Is it's getting to that point where you can start interfacing with AI like you would anybody else at the office almost.
Are you real or are you AI?
We all sound low.
Welcome everybody to Deeper Sync. Glad to have you today. We're going to have a roundtable conversation with Peter de Timmerman, CEO of DeepSync, Paul Turner, Head of Enterprise Sales and GM of Digital, and Ryan Merritt, our Chief Product Officer. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
Before we jump into a bunch of questions that I have, I would love to hear from each of you a little intro about yourself.
Sure.
Peter,
I'll
start
kick
with
it
you.
off. Yeah. Obviously, CEO of DeepSync. Very glad to be here. I joined the company about 2 years ago now. Before that, I worked at a company called LiveRamp, where I ran their B2B business. And generally, I've been in the data space for the last 15 or 16 years. So,
Awesome. Amazing.
Yes.
I love it. Paul.
Paul Turner. I've been with DeepSync now for around about 18 months. Joined via an acquisition in late 2022. Prior to that, I was also at LiveRamp, where I ran their technology sales team. And I've been in the sort of programmatic and data space for around about 17, 18 years now.
All right, awesome. Ryan.
Awesome. And Ryan Merritt, Chief Product Officer. Great to be here. Prior to DeepSync, I was actually at Redfin, the real estate company, running their listing data acquisition team and strategy. Prior to that, I also go back to LiveRamp, running measurement.
See a theme here.
Yeah, measurement, identity, all sorts of good stuff. So lots of background in digital ads as well.
Awesome. Well, Lyndall Bennett, Chief Commercial Officer, DeepSync. I am not from LiveRamp, but I'm glad to be with you all today. So I've got a wide range of topics that I want to cover with all of you, but I just want to see where the conversation goes. The idea here is to put out some thought leadership as far as how should people be considering the big questions that exist in the data landscape today. So the first one that I feel like we have to cover, whether we want to or not, is cookie deprecation. So I'd love to get your thoughts on not just what's happening or what might happen, but how should people be thinking about it? And what choices should they be making now versus what they will have to make once the day actually comes where their cookies are gone? I don't know, Peter, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. I think as a marketer, and you're trying to build your marketing strategy, and in your mind, you're thinking about cookies are going away, mobile ad IDs might be going away, IP addresses might be going away at some point. You have to start investing in your own identity spine. Mm-hmm. Your data needs to be tied to some truth set that resolves back to people and households that you can then, when you execute your marketing strategy, you can now translate to whatever persistent identifier a specific company or platform is using to get you the maximum reach on that platform. And so that can be, ideally, you're building an identity spine that's rooted in personal data, tied to real people with real postal addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, et cetera, that you can then translate to trace SKU IDs or ramp IDs or whatever identity space you're interacting with. And it's not just about running your own ads. It's also about enabling data sharing with your partners that you may want to do some co-marketing activity with. And so being able to resolve back to real people is, to me, the number one thing as a marketer I would invest in right now.
Where do you start with the data itself, Ryan? I mean, maybe you should jump in on that. Like, how, if you need this data foundation, so to speak, how do you build a data foundation that is trusted, accurate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, in a lot of ways, I see this as a very positive opportunity because cookie deprecation is something that's been looming for over a decade, right? And it's been either pushed back or a phased rollout. And so now this is actually happening. It gives brands and advertisers the chance to actually address this and actually do something about it. And in terms of how you start, I think it's really just getting back to the foundation. And by that, I mean building your data asset from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. And to flesh that out a little bit, I think if you look at what a lot of digital identity companies do today, they're stitching together billions of different signals and trying to resolve those or, use technical means to find individuals from that data. And I think when you start with deterministic data, things like name and postal address, in direct mail grade personal information, which we can get into what that is. Yeah. That starts with real world individuals and households, and you build up from there. So I think a bottoms up approach to identity is one of the most important things that brands and advertisers can be thinking about.
So please speak to that then, the direct mail grade data. What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how do you find it?
How do you find it? Well, DeepSync, a lot of our history is in direct mail advertising, meaning, providing data, licensing data for folks to actually send out physical brochures and mailers, things of that nature. So names and postal address, when I say direct mail grade information, that is directly mailable, individuals who are reachable at those addresses. And so in terms of how that differs from, the way that we think about digital advertising, first of all, it's much more expensive and higher stakes when you're sending direct mail advertising. You physically get those postcards back. People are reacting to the information, the marketing information that they get. And so here at DeepSync, when we power roughly 5% of all of the USPS mail that goes out every single year, you can think of us as having kind of nationwide signals of how accurate that data is. Because that data is actively being mailed every single day, we have real consumers who, nationwide are reacting to that and providing signals to us. This is accurate. This is inaccurate. I do or do not live at that address. And so direct mail grade really just refers to those mailable names and addresses that are the best truth set, in our opinion, that you can get.
Yeah. So if you have a direct mail grade data set, how do you tie that back to the online identifiers? I mean, how do you make those two worlds combine?
Yeah, that's a great question. It just goes back to deterministic signals, right? It's being able to observe whether it's in network logs, people who are logging into publicly available Wi-Fi networks, but looking for linkages between that personal information to online identifiers. So for example, if I go to Starbucks, just for the sake of example, and log into their Wi-Fi, I may be providing the Starbucks with my name and my email address.
So that little box you check is saying, I'm letting you do all these things, basically?
Potentially, and that's just for the sake of example, right? But the point being, you can observe, even in the digital ecosystem, links back to PII. And once you have the scale across different networks and different publicly available Wi-Fis, you can actually deterministically tie those online signals like mobile IDs, like email addresses, like IP addresses back to the offline information and start, again, building from the ground up by layering on those digital identifiers.
Okay. So don't start with the digital identifier, start with the deterministic person, address, and then build out. Interesting.
The thing I would add to that
Please.
is if you start with the personal data and you have an email address or a phone number, you can translate that to a digital identifier. And especially in today's world where we're moving to first-party cookies, using identities that are based off of hashed emails or hashed phone numbers, you can always go in that direction if you have the email address and the phone number for the person who is your customer or your prospective customer. And so then you can translate it to all these different identifiers. It's harder to go the other way, right? And so if you have that clear view of here's my customer and I know their email, phone number, etc., you can start to map that to Tradedesk UIDs or ID5s or whatever.
Yep.
And so that makes it a lot easier to start to move into the digital world. Yep. And that's another benefit of the transition that's happening now from away from third-party cookies and towards first-party managed identity.
Well, and on that point, I would say one of the clearest identifiers that this trend or this transition is happening is if you look at even the walled gardens, increasingly they're accepting that personal information or that offline data as a translation layer to, being able to target within their platform. Facebook, Google, TikTok, all of these companies, they accept that personal information, whether it's email address, phone, etc., and you can use it to upload data to the platform and then target.
So that leads to two questions that I have for you. So one, let's say I'm a brand, and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, cookies are going away. I'm in trouble. I see universal identifiers across the spectrum. There's like a bazillion of them. Where do I start on that front? Then I want to come back to your comment about walled gardens. Paul, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it comes back to your business objectives, and I think I would always start with that truth set, that kind of PII starting point, or if you don't want to start with a PII starting point, some form of identifier that's at least somewhat persistent. And if you're a brand or a marketer, that should always start with your own data that's as complete and as hygiene as possible. I think then it's a case of evaluating, which addressability solutions, whether that be the ramp ID or the UUID or ID5 or even contextual capabilities, get me into a point where my acquisition campaigns, for example, drive enough scale to bring new consumers into the business. So I wouldn't say anyone needs to panic at this point, but I think people do need to start testing and evaluating what stable of solutions gives me that ability to give my customers the personalized experiences that they deserve, but also enables me to run my business and bring new customers into the business in a really cost-efficient way.
But what I'm hearing you say as well is that it's not necessarily one solution. It's not necessarily Ramp ID versus the Trade Desk UUID or what have you.
No, I mean, I think that's part of the experimentation process. And if you're a marketer or a brand that works with an agency, you should be holding your agency to account. Say, what is your solution for scale or for CTV versus open web versus walled garden? And the reality is that I don't think that one size will fit all. I think it's a case of understanding, again, which channels work in the new world, and then how do I address those channels as cost effectively as possible.
As a marketer, your objective is to get to the scale that you need to drive your business growth. And so that shouldn't mean bet on one identity solution. It should be whatever combination gets me that scale, that's what you should do. And that's where I think as a marketer, it's really important in today's world to really own and manage your own data asset, whether that's first or third-party data. The combination of those two, as a marketer, you really need to control that so that you can control privacy and privacy methodology, the ability to activate and share that data in marketing campaigns or co-marketing campaigns or whatever the case may be, and to drive measurement on the back end. And so I think it's less about which horse do you pick. It's more about what combination of solutions is going to get me the results that I'm trying to drive.
Well, go ahead.
And I think that kind of foundational personal information-based approach plays really well into that flexibility, because if you think about what those IDs that you mentioned are doing, it's really trying to tie, information that's in the bid stream back to real-world individuals, right? Looking for things like hashed email addresses. And so by having your starting point be data that you own or possess in-house and is based off that personal information, it becomes very straightforward and linear to translate to ID5 or UID2 or any of those different identifiers that exist today.
Yep. Then let me ask you this. So I like what you're all saying, and I like the aspect of how you bring it back to real world results. So I was at Amazon for 10 years. We had something called the Business Growth Framework, where it was all about that. It's like, how do I help you grow the business? You want to grow 35% year over year. How do we help you do that? But it was within the walls of Amazon, right? Like, and if you're a brand that only sells on Amazon, well, then that's powerful for you, and it's your whole business. But if you're Procter & Gamble, and you sell in Walgreens down the street in a brick and mortar, you sell on Amazon, you sell at Walmart.com, what have you, you've got a whole wide range of places across many walled gardens and retail media where you sell. So how should a major CPG that crosses all these walled gardens, not just being Google and Meta, but really the retail media networks, how should they be thinking about these universal identifiers, cookie deprecation, walled gardens? It's a broad topic, but at the end of the day, if I'm Procter & Gamble, I want to know how much am I selling and where do I attribute those sales? Yep. Is it back to the ad I saw on Amazon, or is it to a search on Google or something else?
Right.
I think CPGs in particular, maybe excluding the really large CPGs, but they have a massive kind of cold start data problem in the sense they don't necessarily interact with the consumer directly at enough scale to understand who their audience could be or should be. And so I think some of the trends we're seeing there is that the CPGs are starting to say, actually give us an install of potential customers or customers that look like our customers, and then let us interact through clean rooms and data collaboration with the channels that matter to us to start to bring signal back to a truth set that we can control. And I think that's a big trend in a world where that first-party data becomes far more valuable.
Yep, I love it. Well, I want to change gears a little bit. This is super interesting. Thank you all for riffing on that. In the last few minutes that we have, I have to cover, you have to cover certain things. You have to cover cookies, you got to cover retail media. You also got to cover AI.
Yes.
So there's two ends of what I see people thinking about in AI. You have Skynet, for those that remember Terminator. You also have like AI chatbots, like, oh, now with AI, it's a chatbot that can help me answer questions. Yes. Like, give us the truth. How should people, particularly from a brand perspective, be thinking about AI? And what steps should they take to actually addressing it and making it a part of how they do business better? Ryan, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's important when thinking about AI to look at the reality that AI itself is not new, right? I think what has changed dramatically in the last year or more is branding as well as accessibility, right? It's how easy it is for everyone to access this. And so I think when brands and marketers are thinking about AI, it's really, how do I partner with this? How do I use this as yet another tool in my repertoire rather than something that's, going to replace me or a portion of my job or is scary in some way, right? And so I think two things really come to mind for me when thinking about how marketers use AI. The first is, how can you leverage very accurate data or the data that your brand uniquely has in-house, maybe combined with a third-party asset, to teach and improve the efficacy of AI models that may have access to it. And the second is how you can use AI to answer important marketing questions, right? I think what AI is very, very good at is crunching numbers, analyzing a huge amount of data and making recommendations, but the marketer should still be the decision maker in terms of whether I want to allocate budget there. This campaign is performing well, that one isn't. And so it's really just learning how to partner with AI as just another tool rather than seeing it as, competitive or something that's scary in the industry.
Okay, I like it. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think AI has huge potential to beyond marketing, obviously, but I think from a marketing perspective, it has a huge potential to help brands with the way they engage and how they deliver personalized experiences and how they deliver efficiency through the buying process. But AI models are data hungry, and you need to feed them with the right data consistently to get the right outcome. So, big believer that there's a lot to come from AI and the application of AI. I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is probably a big part of the sort of the hype cycle, so to speak. But there's some really interesting things happening, and clearly brands need to build out data strategies that involve plugging in that data into AI models to deliver outcomes.
Yep. So Peter, you're CEO of this company. If you have any advice for CEOs out there in the world as they're thinking about AI or learning models, maybe use whatever language you prefer for this statement. But what advice would you give CEOs as they're thinking about this and they take the first steps? I mean, you're an industry expert, 15, 16 years of experience. Yep. But for somebody who doesn't, and they're just trying to run a business and trying to grow their business, where should they start?
Yeah. So again, AI is a very broad category by itself. Today, what you're hearing a lot in the news is about these large language models that are being built. But I think the point that you just made is the key point, which is AI and the AI systems are becoming much more accessible. Anybody can start to deploy AI in a much easier way than they could ever before. It's very similar to what happened when Amazon launched AWS. All of a sudden, compute and storage became these very accessible things that you didn't need to invest huge amounts of capital into to start using it. AI is now going through that same transformation where anybody could start a company and you don't necessarily need to hire a whole team of data scientists to start building models that actually deliver results.
Yep.
So that's the first thing, is it's now much more accessible, but you still need data to train these AI models, and you have to be very careful about what data you're plugging into it. It's becoming more common in the news that you're seeing that there are all sorts of copyright violations because these AI models are just ingesting so much data and there's no consideration being given to where did that data come from. And a lot of times they're just regurgitating what they learned. And so that might mean that they're literally putting copyrighted material out there as something novel that they created.
Paul does that all the time.
Yes, exactly. So what is really important to think about is what data are you using? Try to grab access to structured data that is where you understand what the copyrights are to that data, and then make sure that you have a complete data set that you can use that's rich and it's both deep in terms of the different types of attributes that it describes about the thing, the person, or the household, and that you have a lot of it so that it covers the entire nation or the entire world, whatever is important to you. And then use that to start to train models that get iteratively better over time and more sophisticated. You don't need to use AI to solve every problem, but you can start to do, even simple regression analysis, churn analysis, propensity scoring that can be more and more powered by AI to say, when you run your next campaign, you should look at targeting this audience that is a combination of these attributes that you may not have considered before when you think about who's my core audience for my product.
Okay. Yeah, question for you then. So on that point, so is it if Lyndall Bennett was to start his own company,
Sure.
and I don't have money to hire a data scientist or somebody to work on AI for me, is AI to the point where it's democratized enough where I could go access a professional ChatGPT of sorts to do some of that for me?
There are companies who are doing that now. Okay. They're essentially wrapper around these more sophisticated tools in a way that it becomes interactive in a very natural way. And that is the reason that AI is getting all this attention now.
Yep.
Is it's getting to that point where you can start interfacing with AI like you would anybody else at the office almost.
Are you real or are you AI?
We all sound low.
You're too perfect, Peter. All right, we're gonna do a couple last things. One, I have a word association game, so I'm just gonna say a word, and I want you to give me back the first thing you think of. And there's no trick question, I swear. So first, Ryan, we'll start with you. Hygiene.
Foundational.
Paul.
Yes. Oh, right, you are.
Yes, you.
That was the word.
Oh, you want my
Hygiene.
word?
Yes, you put deodorant on today.
Essential.
Essential.
Quality.
Quality. I like it. All right. Deterministic data.
Truth set.
All right, Paul.
I was going to say foundational, but Ryan's used that word already.
It was the first one though, so it counts.
Critical.
Critical. All right.
For me, that goes to methodology.
Okay.
How is that?
Do you explain?
Yeah. Well, deterministic to me describes how something is derived, and it just goes to what's the methodology that you're using around your data. In our case, we're always talking about data. So is it deterministically collected? Is it a heuristic-based signal? Is it a modeled signal? All these things go back to what's the methodology.
All right. I like it. I like it. Okay, last one. Omni-channel measurement.
Challenging.
Do explain.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, like we've been talking about here, to get a true omni-channel view, right? You've got walled gardens, you've got all of these different independent platforms. And like we've talked about here, I think it all comes back to bringing data in-house and reducing your reliance on some of those platforms as much as you can. But true omni-channel measurement, I mean, that's the million-dollar marketing question,
Yeah.
right?
And it has been forever.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You're going to solve that one though, right?
We're working on it.
All right.
Yeah, I'll take the optimistic view that it's becoming a reality.
Okay. Please, do explain.
Well, I think the ability to root all of your understanding into a stable truth set that kind of reflects the real, what I think is point one. Point two is then your capability of stitching kind of identifiers and activity to that truth set, I think opens up the ability to bring in a lot more signal and understand what's happening with that very stable source of truth. So we're seeing some really interesting applications there.
Okay, I like it. Omni-channel measurement.
I was also going to go with challenging.
Okay.
I agree with Paul. It's getting to the point where we can stitch the data together more easily now. But there's so much business logic that sits on top of omni-channel attribution, which is why it's been a hot topic for as long as I can remember.
Yep.
That's the part that remains challenging, but maybe AI can help us figure that piece out.
All right. Well, and that's where we're going to end, not on that statement. As good as that statement was. I want us to end on where do we see things going from here? And maybe it's just a modification of things that are already happening. Maybe it's some sort of big disruption. But as people start thinking about the future, it's almost like there are too many choices to make. You have too many things you can focus on. Is it AI? Is it the cookieless future? Is it both of those things? So where would you help people to focus as they're thinking about the future, Ryan, that they can actually action on?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it's just all about going back to the foundational elements, right? If you look at all of the shifts that have happened in the industry, some of which we've talked about here, some of which we haven't, companies who have strong data assets have been able to weather those storms better than those that have not, right? Yep. And so when you think about, again, walled gardens versus independent platforms, you never want to become too reliant on any one kind of external entity. And investing in building your own data sets, building AI applications on top of that, I don't think you can ever go wrong with that. So for me, it's really just about taking identity very seriously. And to me, that looks like building those foundational assets and taking that data asset in-house in order to prepare yourself and future-proof yourself for whatever is to come.
Okay, well, one clarifying question.
Yeah.
This has been a hot topic. Data spine versus identity graph. Because you both mentioned just spine and graph.
Sure.
Describe, please.
Absolutely. So think of spine in general as kind of what a data set is keyed off of, right? So if I've got a data set of students and their test scores, that data set is keyed off of the individual students, the individual records. At DeepSync, we think of identity spine. When I say identity spine, again, is that deterministic name and postal direct mail grade information. Mm-hmm. When I say graph, I'm expanding that to include digital identifiers, things like mobile IDs and IP addresses, and then the attributes that are attached to those individuals. So spine, that's the foundational element that everything is built off of. Graph includes those other IDs that are sometimes perceived as, anonymous in the digital realm, as well as the attributes attached to them.
I like it. Awesome. Paul, last words.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with Ryan. I think focus on the fundamentals. I think if you're a brand or a marketer, how do you deliver amazing customer experiences based on collecting data and ensuring that data is kept up to date and fresh and hygiened? Then how do you take the learnings from those customers and expand that into your prospecting and outbound marketing activities? So I think we always think this industry is moving incredibly fast, but actually if you look at kind of the last 17, 18, 20 years since we've all been in the space, I think there have been some pretty fundamental changes, but actually the companies that are succeeding, to Ryan's point, are the ones that are focused on just doing the fundamentals right over and over again, and then testing kind of new stuff as it emerges.
Well, and think about your own comment. Like, we are going back to where direct mail grade is the foundation of what we're trying to do for the future. So it's interesting that which has been thought of as an old school type of marketing element is actually foundational.
Fear is a great motivator, and again, the fear of getting it wrong in direct mail is real, and it's tangible in terms of the money and the customer experience that can impact. So I think we can probably still learn quite a lot from how direct mail has survived over the years.
I like it. Peter, last
I'm
word.
going to stick with these two guys and say that having a foundational data asset is key. The reason that I say that, though, is when you look at a marketer and the platforms and technologies they use, there's an ever-growing number of places that you need to interact with as a marketer. AI systems, cloud systems, ad serving systems, measurement systems, analytics platforms, like there's a massive list and it never gets smaller. The thing that glues all of them together is the data.
Yep.
And so if you are really good at being able to identify your core audiences and transpose those into these different platforms so that they become actionable, whatever the use case may be, that's the thing that I think sets marketers apart who are very successful. And that seems to also be the universal truth that we see. 15 years ago was DMPs that were powering that. Now it's CDPs that are helping to move that data around and sort of centralize it. But the marketers that have a real handle on their own data and all the third-party data that they use around that and the identity data that helps to power that, those are the marketers that are, in my opinion, the most successful.
I like it. So data is the tie that binds is what I'm hearing you say. I like it. Very good. Thank you all for your time. Really appreciate this conversation, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.